Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to welcome you all to this session on Kashmir under siege. My name is Ghulam Nabi. I'm President of World Kashmir Awareness. Your sympathy and your support for your brothers and sisters means a great deal to them over in Kashmir, to us Kashmiri Americans in here. And it speaks volumes about your commitment, your own humanity, and your sense of justice for all the people, particularly the oppressed. I also want to thank you for taking time from other sessions that you were interested in for coming here to hear about Kashmir. I'd like to also thank ISNA for providing us this stage, this opportunity, year after year, since 1990. We're meeting here at a time of great peril. Kashmir as a nation, as we knew it, and as we know it even today, and millions of its people. If Indian invasion and occupation of Jammu and Kashmir in 1947 was a wild assault on our freedom, stealing our hard-earned revolution since 1931, August 5, 2019 will go down infamously in the future history of Jammu and Kashmir. No words, no TV images, no documentaries, and no social media depictions can tell the full story of pain and suffering, anxiety and fear. And the revulsion people of Kashmir must be feeling as we speak. But we, as a unified community, if we put our resources together, your emotional support, your moral support, and your prayers, we can change the narrative of the oppression and our struggle and resistance for a Kashmir free of occupation, with the liberation to a plebiscite. We're not asking for any more, we're asking for progress.
Most of us, when we think about Kashmir, if we ever do think about it, kind of just, especially in the media, and even many times in our own communities, it's just seen as a dispute between India and Pakistan. It's a territorial dispute. We go kind of reference back to partition, and those are the kind of words that are used: conflict, dispute, partition. And what happens as a result of this kind of framing is that Kashmiris, their lives, their aspirations, their desires are often erased and overlooked. So from the Kashmiri perspective, what's important to know is that this issue did not start at the time of partition. For Kashmiris, their struggle has been one of a prolonged movement for self-determination, that in its most recent formation has been against the Indian occupation. But before India, it was against colonial rule, against the Dogras, against Sikhs, and so on. But since 1947, it's been against Indian rule. And just to kind of give you a broad overview, Kashmir has a very distinct identity. It was an independent kingdom historically. It has a very rich culture, language, religious space, spirituality, and has, in the past 400 or 500 years been ruled by different rulers. But really does have a kind of a distinct identity that's also important to keep in mind. In 1931, and this is what Dr. Mir made reference to, Kashmiri Muslims basically decided that they had enough and that they were starting their movement against the Dogras. And this was led by a number of Kashmiri Muslims who had gotten educated outside of Kashmir, come back, learned about their rights, and started to kind of begin their freedom struggle for political and social rights. So Kashmiris trace back that struggle to 1931. And this is an image from 1931 when the Dogra army basically fired upon Kashmiri Muslim protesters and killed 22 people. And to this day, July 13th, 1931 is still known as Martyrs' Day in Kashmir. So just to give you a sense that this was all happening even before partition. Of course, then what ends up happening is that this movement for indigenous rights then gets complicated at the time of partition. And many of us are here familiar with partition history, so I don't have to go into it too much. But Kashmir was this unique space that had a Muslim majority, but it was ruled by a Hindu ruler, the Dogra Maharaja Hari Singh himself. And Dogra Maharaja responded quite harshly. Historians say that up to 200,000 people were massacred during that period. Almost a quarter of a million Jammu Muslims actually went across to Pakistan. And this massacre has completely been overlooked by historians, Indian historians especially, because what the Indians usually say is that, everything was fine in Kashmir, things were at peace, the Maharaja wanted to join India, and it was only when the Pakistani tribes came that things got bad. So the blame is always given to the other side. There's no recognition of the fact that this was an indigenous uprising by Jammu Muslims themselves who did not want the Maharaja to join India. So India brought in its troops. India and Pakistan went to war. India brought the issue then to the United Nations, and this is also important. It wasn't Pakistan that brought the issue to the United Nations, it was India. And the UN basically called for a cessation of hostilities, demilitarization on the border, and plebiscite. So UN resolutions since 1948 that have related to Kashmir have always stated that the Kashmiris have the right to self-determination. And that is kind of what Kashmiris basically hold on to in terms of the legal argument for their case. And that never ended up happening. What ended up happening is that Kashmir was divided, 2/3 controlled by India, 1/3 by Pakistan. And the area in orange that you can see here is what is part of, or what's occupied by India. It includes the Kashmir Valley, which is kind of the hub of where all resistance has been. Jammu, which I mentioned earlier, had already been ethnically cleansed of its Muslims. And then Ladakh, which has both Muslims as well as Buddhists. And then Pakistan controls northern areas and it's also known as Azad Kashmir. The Indian government installed a client regime, a group of Kashmiris who had agreed, Kashmiri Muslims who had agreed to the accession, but only under the policy that Kashmir would have its own internal autonomy. And again, that autonomy was in the Treaty of Accession itself, that Kashmiris, the Indian state would only control defense, communications, foreign affairs, that Kashmir otherwise would have its own prime minister, its own flag, its own constitution, its own state legislature. And that autonomy was enshrined in something called Article 370. And that is what the Indian government has basically revoked in August. And I'll talk about the implications of that in a bit. Over time, the Indian government eroded Kashmir's autonomy. So since 1947 up until August, we lost the nomenclature, the prime minister, all different arenas, education, economic, financial ties, the judicial system, all of that has been imposed on Kashmir. So there was really no autonomy, except for one particular thing, which I'll talk about in a bit, that existed on the ground in Kashmir. But there was still this article that existed in the Indian Constitution, and Kashmiris could at least still use to protect themselves from being completely taken over by the Indian state. India usually says that Kashmiris have given their assent to Indian rule by participating in elections. And this is, again, one of the biggest myths of the whole occupation, is that many of these elections have been rigged, including the one in 1987, which is what eventually led to the armed rebellion. Only pro-Indian, pro-accession Indian parties have historically been able to run, many times without any opposition. And even recently, when Kashmiris have participated in elections, they never participated under this understanding that they were a part of India, but rather for issues of governance or just local control. So that's kind of another myth that usually gets peddled, that yes, even though Kashmiris didn't have a plebiscite, they still, vote in elections. But elections play a very different role on the ground, and the way that they're managed by the state is also very different. And what you can see in this image here is a movement called the plebiscite movement, which was represented by a number of different political parties on the ground, including the plebiscite conference and the political conference. From the 1950s to the 1970s, Kashmiris were peacefully demanding a plebiscite. And you can see men and women on the streets holding up signs saying we demand a plebiscite. And the next phase after the 1950s to the 70s, the plebiscite movement is the armed rebellion of the late 1980s. And this is when Kashmir became militarized. So I mentioned earlier that there was a rigged election in 1987, and there were local parties that basically wanted to run under this banner of something called the Muslim United Front. And their idea was to use the Indian electoral process and constitutional means to get into power and then declare freedom from India. Those elections were massively rigged, and as a result, the Kashmiris felt that they had no other options but to turn to a tourist armed struggle. And India responded very harshly. The region became incredibly militarized. India brought in 700,000 troops to Kashmir, and prior to this, many of the troops were on the border region, on the line of control. But these troops actually went into civilian areas, bunkers were set up, checkpoints were set up, and daily life for millions of Kashmiris was completely transformed. And to this day, Kashmir is the most militarized zone in the world. 700,000 troops. And if you think about sort of the height of the American occupation of Iraq or Afghanistan, there were 150,000 troops, American troops on the ground. And this is Kashmir with 700,000 troops. And of course, there were a number of massacres that happened, so this is an image of one of them. Too many to kind of name in the early 90s, where there were a number of human rights violations. The Indian Army was protected by something called ASPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which basically gave Indian soldiers complete immunity in Kashmir. They could do what they wanted and never face any trial or any kind of court. And Kashmir basically became a graveyard. So 70,000 people in this time were killed, mostly young men. And there were clampdowns, for those who have lived in Kashmir in that time, what the army would basically do is force, especially young men and older men, out of their homes, have them all kind of gather in a place and terrorize them, beat them up, accuse them of different things, and there was a huge, immense level of fear on the ground. And there also used to be a practice where the Indian state would get local informers, often coercively, and have them, you can see on this image here, they're seated in these vans, these gypsies, and their face would be covered. They were called cats. And they would line up men from a village, young men, old men from a village, and place them in front of a cat. And if the cat nodded his head, then that person was deemed a militant. And they would be disappeared, killed, what have you. So an incredibly fearful time in most of the 90s. And of course, women were not spared the brutal life of the army. There's been cases of gang rapes in Kashmir. The most infamous case being the villages of Kunan and Bashpura, where over 100 soldiers gang raped Kashmiri women. Some very young, but even women as old as in their 80s. And there has been no redress of this issue. The Indian government completely denies, the army completely denies that it happened, and they accuse the women of fabricating these stories. Another way in which the Indian government managed to suppress this indigenous rebellion is by introducing notorious counterinsurgency groups. So this is one of them, led by someone who was an ex-militant, who then they turned into a renegade militant named Kukure. And these men were basically unleashed on the local population. They committed a number of human rights violations as well. They in tandem with the state. And this was one way that the government was able to suppress and divide the movement as well. So, 70,000 killings around this time, more than 20,000 people detained, 8,000 that were disappeared, and most recently, human rights activists have discovered mass graves in Kashmir that hold up to 2,000 to 3,000 bodies. So the fear is that many of those mass graves belong to those who have been disappeared as well. And one important instance that also happened during this time was the forced migration of Kashmiri Pandits. So the Kashmir Valley was 95% Muslim, but also had a significant Kashmiri Pandit or Kashmiri Hindu population. And this is a very dark chapter in Kashmir's history, where there's a lot of contending and emotional and intense narratives about what happened. Basically, the narrative from the Pandit side, those who left Kashmir and settled in camps in Jammu and Delhi and elsewhere in the US, was that there was an exodus, there was an ethnic cleansing, thousands of Pandits died, they were driven out by their Muslim neighbors, and that the insurgency or the movement of rebellion had become Islamist, and they wanted to rid Kashmir of its Hindus, of its indigenous Hindus. And that's not the case at all. This is one of the ways in which the occupation works to divide religious communities on the ground. And what a lot of Kashmiri Muslims say, and will admit, is that yes, of course, emotions were running high. We were upset with India, we were upset with people who we thought were collaborating with India. There were some Kashmiri Pandits that were killed, not for their religious identity, but for their association with the Indian state. And there were Kashmiri Muslims also who were killed for their association with the Indian state. But that it was a period of panic and chaos, and the Indian government benefited from that situation and turned two groups of people who had otherwise mostly lived or coexisted in the region against each other. And now the Kashmiri Pandit narrative becomes the number one issue that's often used or weaponized against Kashmiri Muslims demanding freedom today. So for those of you who are on social media or see kind of any article that represents what's happening on the ground even now in Kashmir, you'll see dozens and dozens and dozens of comments that always just say, well, what about the Kashmiri Pandits? What about when millions of Pandits were driven out and millions of women were raped? And this is unfortunately something that we have to deal with, and Kashmiri Muslims have to deal with as well. Even our pro-freedom leaders, Kashmiri Muslim pro-freedom leaders, have always said that the Pandits should be able to come back to Kashmir and live with their Muslim neighbors as neighbors. But what the Indian government is trying to do is bring the Pandits back as settlers. So divide them and create these Hindu enclaves or Hindu-only enclaves, and basically not have them as neighbors but as settlers. So this is an issue that won't go away, but it's important for people to understand what exactly is happening or why there's so much venom against Kashmiri Muslims. So over time, India managed to suppress the armed rebellion, and for about 5 to 10 years, it seemed that things were normal in Kashmir, which they weren't. People still were very much angry with the Indian state, and it only took kind of one or two steps on behalf of the Indian government to get people to rise up and revolt again. So in 2008 is when the most recent cycle of the Intifada has, the Kashmir Intifada has begun. And this is the generation that was born and grew up during the period of the rebellion, of the armed rebellion. And they have known nothing else but that. This is the levels of militarization and violence that they've been living under. And there were peaceful protests initially. Almost 1 million people marched to the United Nations demanding a referendum or demanding a plebiscite. And India, again, clamped down on these peaceful protests. So since 2008 until today, there's been cycles where something happens, either someone is killed, there's a rape that happens, an attempted land grab, where Kashmiris will rise up again, protest against the Indian government, get shot at, get pelleted, and at the funerals of the people who've been killed, the same thing will happen again and again. So that's basically been Kashmir since 2008. And it's the young people who have really been at the helm of this resistance. And before Modi came to power, the Congress Party in India also responded quite violently to Kashmir, but they would always have a bit of a parent-specific approach. Since 2014, when Modi's come to power, the BJP's approach to Kashmir has been under something called the Doval Doctrine, which basically is an operation all out, that Kashmiri resistance at every single level must be completely suppressed, that there is no space or scope for people to even protest peacefully. So even since 2014 or 2016, after the death of one of the popular local rebel leaders, over 1,000 Kashmiris have been killed. This was way before August 5th. And over 1,200 were hit with pellets. So the Indian government's strategy for crowd control is to use sometimes live ammunition, sometimes tear gas, but also to use something called pellet guns, which basically unleashes hundreds and hundreds of lead pellets into protesters' bodies. And the New York Times in 2016 called this an epidemic of dead eyes, where many of the protesters were targeted above their waist, and many of them were blinded. So there's a whole group of young men, women that have been hit by pellet guns. And this is just an image of what Kashmir looks like on a regular day, which is most likely always a curfew day, where all the markets have been shut, schools are not in session for months at a time during periods of intense violence. Kashmiri children don't go to school. Banks, offices remain closed, businesses remain closed, and what you usually just have is Indian Army patrolling the streets, concertina wires, bunkers, and checkpoints. And even though since August 5th, the communication blockade has been intense, since 2008, and especially since Modi came to power, communication is stamped, communication is clamped down upon in Kashmir on a very frequent basis, over 40, 50 times a year, where the internet is shut down for a couple of days to make sure that people don't mobilize or they're not able to communicate with each other. And this has kind of been an ongoing response of the Indian state. So I wanted to now kind of switch our attention to August 5th and what happened and why it was significant. Basically, in the days running up to August 5th, the Indian government asked tourists and pilgrims who were there for an annual Hindu pilgrimage to leave Kashmir immediately. And that obviously caused panic on the ground. People had no idea what to expect or what was going to happen. They also deployed an additional 35,000 troops to add to the existing 700,000 plus troops that are already there. And within a couple of days, there was a communication blockade. And phone lines, including landlines, which sometimes do still remain open in previous instances there was no way for Kashmiris to communicate with each other or with the outside world. So most of us who have family in Kashmir have been able to get in touch with our family members that are there. And then on August 5th, the Modi government basically announced in the Indian Parliament that Kashmir's special status, Article 370, that was in the Indian Constitution, would be revoked, and that Kashmir would be demoted from a state that had the special status to a union territory, which basically meant that it would be directly under the control of the central government. And then on the ground, we had absolutely no idea what was happening. We knew that there were restrictions on movement and public gatherings. There was a heavy deployment of forces in neighborhoods to make sure that people weren't coming out to protest. The access to journalists was severely restricted by the Indian government. So it became a significant issue. We also knew and heard that political, civil leaders had been detained, and now recent reports have come out that said that up to 4,000 Kashmiris have been detained, both political leaders but also civic leaders, human rights activists, etc. Some of them have been sent to places in India, different cities in India. And many of those who have been detained have also been children, as young as 11. And we know this because an Indian fact-finding team actually went to Kashmir in these days, and they came out with a report called Kashmir Cage, where they saw and interviewed families who had not seen their sons for days that the army had picked up. And there were a number of people that were also taken into camps and then sent back home, who were tortured and beaten up. And there was images on the BBC, a really horrifying story on the BBC that was published recently, which shows what that looked like, what it looks like for Indian men to be tortured. And there's also a health crisis that some of the news have recently been reporting as well, where people aren't able to have access to medicine or to even get to the hospital should they need to. We know stories of people who have had a miscarriage as well because of these restrictions and because of the kind of stress and trauma that people are going through. So that's just a sense of the ground situation. Again, we don't know what's happening in places outside of Srinagar, the capital city, in villages, in rural areas, in places where the resistance has especially been very, very intense. We have no idea how many people have been killed or anything like that. There's an information blockade in that sense. And the reason why this is so significant today, again, we know that Kashmiris, you can see from this narrative, Kashmiris have suffered for a long, long time. But what, as I mentioned earlier, they face now is an existential threat. The reason why the Modi government and the Hindu nationalist parties have been intent on revoking Article 370 is to change the demographics on the ground. And what the earlier state government had power to do through something called Article 35A was to define what a permanent resident of Kashmir would be. And permanent residents could hold property, they could work in the state administration, they could get certain jobs, they could get scholarships. But this was something that the state government had set up to ensure that the demographics of Kashmir would remain the same, and that there wouldn't be this onslaught of Indians that then come by land and by property. And now that's gone. So effectively what we have is a settler colonial project that will be happening in Kashmir. Not dissimilar from what's already been happening in Palestine. And what this allows Indians to do is to come in, buy land, drive local people out of their homes, have Indian businesses already. There's huge business conglomerates like the Army Group and others that are planning their certain economic projects in Kashmir. And there's a real threat now of other ethnic cleansing. So this is why the situation is incredibly dire. And from Kashmir, other spaces, other regions, other issues will also come up. So that's why for all of us here, we need to be informed. We need to do whatever we can to raise the voice of people who are literally voiceless. They have absolutely no way of communicating with the outside world. And we also have to be smart and understand that the other side is both militarily, economically, and politically quite powerful.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Now we need to realize that the situation or what is taking place in India is not disconnected from the broader global trend that we are seeing with ethno-religious nationalism or ultra-nationalism that is taking place. Just recently, we just actually have a whole report of Islamophobia in India, stoking bigotry. This is after about 2-year research to document Islamophobia systematically in India. So if you want to pick a copy, it's in booth 1200. And I think what the situation in India is connected to the broader assault on the Muslims, both here domestically, in Europe, and in India, China, Myanmar, and the political atmosphere globally have made it almost permissible to engage in violations of basic Muslim rights across. And I think Palestine is basically it's a 70 to 100-year pain that the Muslims have been facing, and I think there is parallel in terms of the legacy. So if you allow me, I want to put some points for us in conversation, for us to understand what is confronting us. We know that India have revoked Article 35A, and I think to understand what are the consequences, and I also compared the situation to what took place in Palestine. India is shifting toward a settler colonial paradigm. And it's very important to understand what a settler colonial paradigm entails. It often entails, if not exclusively, either genocide or transfer. So all settler colonial projects find or posit that the indigenous population is not needed. So we need to separate between what we call classical colonialism, motherland, and satellite colonies versus settler colonialism. England was engaged in what you call motherland and colonies. It uses the population for labor to extract natural resources, it brings the natural resources, raw material to the motherland colony, and then return back finished product. Settler colonialism, on the other hand, engages in systematic genocide because the population itself is not needed, because the settlers say that this is our land, and the indigenous population is created to be a subhuman category that is to be disposed of. I don't need to take you out. The United States has been one of the most successful settler colonial projects, and as such we could see the two dynamics have occurred: genocide of the native population, and then transfer of those who remain into reservations, what we call Indian reservations. I think that what India is attempting to do is engage in a settler colonialism. It's possibly transferring out and transferring in. So in order to engage in demographic design by trying to shift the demographics of the population. Now, key element in settler colonialism is land rights. Key aspect of settler colonialism is land rights. Therefore, land rights and access to land is very critical. What I recommend for my Kashmiri brothers and sisters is to immediately engage in land registry and to certify that the lands that are in the hands of the Kashmiris today will remain as such. As possibly you know, Islamic history allowed the peasants to have access to public land, to bring it into cultivation. Most of this land under the term Masha is not registered in deeds in a systematic way, both from the British colonial period as well as subsequently in the Indian period. In Palestine, we have faced this dynamic as Israel went into a hyper-settler colonial project in the occupied territories, giving no recognition to existing land rights. So as such, your registry becomes very critical in that process to make sure that the lands that are held, especially by peasants are maintained, and then there is a reference point to that era, because I think systematically, as India engages also in moving people out of the citizen category, which is another dynamic of it, that subsequent to this would be a challenging of land rights. So this is something, again, from the painful experience of the Palestinians to be aware as India engages in this project. The second point that I would ask, and again, this is a conversation for us to have, I would recommend that we engage the International Criminal Court and immediately file a legal case at the International Criminal Court, as well as filing cases against individuals. We might not be able to file it in the United States because the United States have it, but our brothers and sisters in Europe, which has a far more robust engagement with the International Criminal Court, to be able, again, if anything, it just brings or puts a yellow card or a red card for the Indian political leadership to know that they will be pursued and they will be contested. We might find some hospitable places to do so, and some resistance, considering that we are experiencing a global phenomenon of ultra-right political parties and mobilization. But the fact that we have such a massive right-wing upheaval should not prevent us from doing our diligent work in order to actually think of a long-term strategy in relation to the struggle. Third, I think to think of multilateral agencies. I think the United Nations, European Union, OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, even though that it has lack of cooperations, we still need to insist on putting these elements in there. In that sense, I think what we need is certain elements where we include the Kashmir case on those elements. And let me point that we need to bring into force the Fourth Geneva Convention. All contracting parties are responsible. If acts of genocide are suspected or have been taken, the parties to the Fourth Geneva Convention are responsible to bring the articles into force. And I think what we need is to constantly bring those into forceful engagement. Also, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on Genocide, Convention on Indigenous Peoples' Rights, which I think is a very important convention to assert that the Kashmiris in Kashmir are indigenous to the land, and therefore bring the articles of the Convention on the Indigenous Peoples' Rights into force. International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. These are conventions that the Palestinian movement have always engaged in, and therefore what it creates a new arena where you can test India's attempt to try to create ethno-nationalism, ethno-religious nationalism, and negate the rights of the Kashmiris and subvert their self-determination. So these are very critical. Next item for me is our role in here domestically. All politics is local. All politics is local. So we should engage in a very organized, targeted, strategic boycott of key Indian products. And I spoke in conversation with our Kashmiri brothers and sisters. When you're engaging in boycott, you need to identify a very strategic product that has a distribution and diffusion among the population. Eliminate or boycott all products, because that's untenable. If you give a list of 2,000 products, tell people boycott these, it's like somebody says, I can't exist. But what you need, and this is the lessons of the South African anti-apartheid movement, is you select products, specific products, and I think as we move forward, is to do the research to see what product that we would engage in targeted boycott, in essence to make the product India itself unsupported and not diffused within the broader society. And I think that's where some of the work needs to be. Now, if you're a person that want to boycott everything individually, that's fine. But as a matter of mobilization, it has to be mobilized upon a particular product in there. Now, part of my caution is sometimes people want to boycott the military-industrial complex. I'm all for it. but you can't go and carry a campaign of boycott, popular campaign, and say, I want you to boycott the M1 tank and F-16, because none of you actually would buy for Eid or birthday an M1 tank or F-16. So basically, it's an ineffective boycott. So you can ideologically have an anti-military industrial complex, but as far as a mobilization for political activism and pressure, you have to select products that have a diffusion within the society. In the anti-apartheid movement, we focused on Coca-Cola as a product. Even though it did not have a massive footprint in South Africa, it had a plant, the overall return for Coca-Cola from the South African market was very minimal. But what it had a massive footprint in here, and it actually got the individual to make a moral choice. Should I be drinking Coca-Cola that is associated with South Africa, or should I take Pepsi? So people began to take this, and every campus, every athletic team, so on, had a sponsorship from Coca-Cola. So you localize the struggle in here, because as long as South Africa was way distance away, you could not actually engage people in terms, they have to go through the intellectual process. But once you localize it specifically to their choice, now their moral choice is local, and their engagement with that is very important. So we need to strategize and identify that process as we move forward. In addition, in terms of localized politics, we need to engage our partners. I know many of us are engaged in interfaith relationship. And as Moody comes around to the different parts, and I know he came to the Bay Area, some of our so-called interfaith partners went and sat with him, shook hands, and took pictures. If you take a picture with a person that had millions of people under lockdown, have 700,000 troops, almost 94,000 be dead in Kashmir and killed, and you have a person that's been accused of genocide, that picture should be a shame for any interfaith partner that goes in there. And you need to hold them responsible. I am all for discussing what you're feeling about God and what you know about God and so on. That conversation has a red line, which means that a state and a person that is accused of genocide should not be engaged in the process. And this is where our own domestic, the Hindu-American Foundation has to be challenged. And again, from our perspective, their relationship with the Israeli and AIPAC also has to be challenged in there, because that's how they can at least get in access. So this is again very critical, and I know some of the people who work with us in the Bay Area in terms of how interfaith is basically has been used as almost a way to not engage in principled engagement relative to all issues. So these are some of the key pieces, but rest assured that our mobilization and engagement does have an effect, especially as this is going to drag on. We need to contest at every turn and make sure that our political elite at the local level, national level, as well as the international level, are held accountable and responsible for what's taking place in Kashmir, inshallah. Does that mean that nobody will have some questions and how to really bring our struggle both in terms of Kashmir and Palestine and learn from each other, because our crisis, again, is not local but actually global. Assalamu alaikum.